That's how precious your mental health and your brain health, that's how precious they are. And my concern is that there are many people who sometimes they portray themselves as if they are mental health care professionals, and they're not. They might be mental health advocates, for example. But to emphasize your mental health is precious, and you should only really be seeing a specialist if there are concerns that you are experiencing a mental health crisis or that you have a mental health condition. Now, don't get me wrong. There is some really interesting research that's being carried out. In Harare in Zimbabwe, for example, there's something called the friendship bench. And so there's a type of low-intensity psychological therapy that non-specialists are delivering, the type of talking therapy. And those non-specialists are grandmothers. And there was a study that was conducted that revealed that grandmothers are better than doctors at treating depression. So we're hoping to bring that friendship bench here to the masjid, inshallah, but we want to adapt it so that it incorporates Islam. So that was my professional background, if you like. And also, a lot of people who experience mental health problems, what we tend to do is we attribute it, especially members of the Muslim community, we attribute it to supernatural causes. We think it's the evil eye, hasad. We think it's being possessed or influenced by the jinn. And as Muslims, we believe in this. But as a Muslim psychiatrist, this is not common. It's more likely that you are experiencing a mental health condition. And so what's happening is, instead of going to see a mental health care professional, we're going to these Iraqis. And we believe in ruqya. But unfortunately, there's a Iraqi or a ruqya industry, which is lucrative, and it's not regulated. And when you're at your most vulnerable, you see often these self-proclaimed Iraqis who can take advantage of you. They can financially exploit you. So we have to be careful, especially when it comes to mental health. We have low levels of mental health literacy in the Muslim community, defined as knowledge and beliefs about mental disorders, which aid their recognition, management, or prevention. So this is a major issue as well. So hopefully we can provide you with psychoeducation to improve your mental health literacy. Because a lot of us, we don't even know when we are suffering from a mental health condition. So the World Health Organization, I've done some work with the World Health Organization, and I recently came back from Kyiv in Ukraine. I was on a mental health mission with the World Health Organization, and they invited me to give a talk about the human rights of people living with mental health conditions, because often people living with mental health conditions, their human rights are violated. So who conceptualizes mental health as a state of well-being in which the individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. So if you notice any distress, if you notice any dysfunction, so that can be impairment in your academic functioning, if you're a student, that can be impairment in your occupational functioning, if you're working, or impairment in your social functioning, in your social life. If you've noticed, as I said, to reiterate, any distress or dysfunction, then you should at the very least consider that you might be experiencing a mental health condition. Now, an example of a mental health condition or a mental disorder is post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. You may have heard of it before. And it's an anxiety disorder. And the symptoms have to persist for at least 4 weeks. And you have different types of symptoms. Now, the head of mental health services in Palestine once said, her people do not suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder because their trauma is ongoing. And she said, present traumatic stress disorder may be a more fitting description of their experience, of our experiences. But for you to develop this condition, PTSD, it has to be in person. You have to actually be there. But don't make, I can't emphasize this enough, don't diagnose yourself. You have to go see a mental health care professional. Because a lot of people are diagnosing themselves, especially with mental health conditions. Don't do that. Okay, so I think we are collectively more traumatized than we realize we are, for multiple reasons. You may have heard of Sigmund Freud. He's a psychiatrist. His work is secular in the sense that it excludes religiosity and faith. However, I think it's a helpful framework, and I will refer to it. The mind, there are different models of the mind. You have the topographical model of the mind, and you have the structural model of the mind. The structural model is the ego, the superego, and the id. The ego is the nafs. And this nafs is the cause of so much misery on our planet. And if only we could try to manage the nafs, the ego, the pride, then there would be better interpersonal relations. So that's one model of the mind, the structural. The other model is the topographical. Now, you may have heard of the unconscious mind and the conscious mind. Now, the mind mounts defense mechanisms. So when you experience trauma, your mind will mount a defense mechanism. And what usually happens is because it's so intolerable and unbearable that the trauma is buried into the unconscious mind. You are not aware of it. But even though you're not aware of the traumatic effects, it heavily influences your interactions with others and your mental health and your functioning. And that's why it's really important to seek therapy. Now, there's so much stigma attached to mental health conditions in the Muslim community and to therapy, for example. I mean, many of you wouldn't hesitate to receive physiotherapy if you sprained your shoulder, for example, right? You wouldn't think twice about it. If you were anyone here, I went to medical school in Manchester. Anyone support Manchester United? No? Okay, so the point is, are you a Man United supporter? No? Liverpool? Mohamed Salah? Mohamed Salah? Allahu Akbar. The point I'm making is if you're a professional footballer, the body is under a tremendous amount of stress and strain. So if you were whatever, using your smartphone and you found out that Mohamed Salah sustained a physical injury to his body, that wouldn't surprise you because of the stress and strain of his profession. And if he said he had to take some time out, get some physiotherapy, you wouldn't think twice about it. But all the stress and strain that our minds are under, and if someone said to you, I have to take some time out to receive therapy, oh my goodness, this person majnoon. He's crazy, you stigmatize him. There's so much stigma, especially, this is what my research over the last 15 years is pioneering innovative interventions to reduce mental health related stigma in the Muslim community. Mental health related stigma is rampant in the Muslim community. Do you know what that means? That means despite the availability of effective treatment, many Muslims with mental health problems continue to suffer in silence. That's what's happening. And that's unacceptable. And I'll come back to that. I'll elaborate on that some more. So, going back to these defense mechanisms, a lot of the trauma is submerged in the unconscious mind, and even though we're not aware, it's influencing our interactions with others, it's influencing our mental health, and it's influencing our functioning. A lot of you may have noticed you perhaps are a bit more irritable, or you are maybe short, more, your temper is shorter, or you're more argumentative. I don't know. Has anyone noticed that? That can be a trauma response. I mean, what do you expect? We are witnessing. These are war crimes, right? Crimes against humanity, man's inhumanity to man. Women, children, civilians being killed. The brutality of what's happening in Palestine, our brothers and our sisters and our children. If that doesn't affect you, where is your heart? If there's any heart inside you, then this will affect you. So, I want to now talk a bit about my personal experience. So, I'm Aslam in Lebanon. I'm originally from Lebanon. I only lived in Lebanon for 5 years. But it's still an integral ingredient of my identity. By the way, a lot of our Muslim youth are experiencing an identity crisis. We don't know who we are. Am I Canadian? Am I Lebanese? Am I British? Am I Palestinian? You have to know yourself. What's your personality type? What's your personality structure? What are your strengths? What are your vulnerabilities? And unless you know yourself, this can render you vulnerable to developing mental health problems. We don't talk about these taboo topics in the Muslim community. We need to talk about, at the very least, we need to talk about these things. So in the 2006 Lebanon war, I was a medical student in Manchester in England. And I reacted. I was sensitized to the events that were unfolding in Lebanon at the time. And I developed what I call an episode of psychological distress. The symptoms were debilitating, but the stigma was far worse. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, I eventually recovered. And I will share with you all what the tools were that I used. I'll mention it now and then I will expand later. So, Salah, the power of prayer. We all know the power of prayer. Prayer can be therapeutic, it can be dignifying, it can elevate you. The performing arts, and what I mean by the performing arts is poetry, expressing myself, having the vocabulary to express myself. And we know, for example, if you're a veteran, they become violent, don't they? If after the tour of duty, they come back and they start beating their wives. Astaghfirullah al-Azim. Domestic violence, interpersonal violence. And there was one veteran, he said, when my vocabulary improved, I became less aggressive. So your ability to express yourself through the power of poetry, spoken word poetry. And we know the poets, they occupied an important station. You know this movie message, Risala? You remember the opening scene? When Abu Sufyan, he entered the marketplace. You remember it? And the poet was on the pulpit. Bread and water do the poets have in Hakim's house, where verse and prose are nightly put to slaughter. And the bread, I swear, over there, it's thinner than the water. Open a space, you lovers of poetry, to Abu Sufyan, willing and rich, patron of the arts. When Abu Sufyan invites the poet in, their joyous kith and love is kin, where wines and cakes abound, the skills of verse are found. All revels and all songs begin, when Abu Sufyan invites the poet in. So just by watching this film, by watching that scene, just that, the poetry from this poet, it was very powerful. There's something called art therapy. So we can talk about that more, inshallah. And that contributed to my recovery. And it continues to contribute to my mental health resilience. And then exercise. Exercise. I'm passionate about not only mental health promotion, health promotion. How many Muslims are out of shape? How many? It's disgraceful. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I run every day 15 kilometers. Non-negotiable. I have to run every single day 15 kilometers. I know, if I don't, I know what will happen to me. A healthy body is a healthy mind. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I think even when he was in his 60s, the Sahaba, they couldn't keep up with him because he was walking so fast. I remember when I was in, I don't know if you know Manchester, Moss Side, the brothers had a reputation. A lot of the Somalian brothers were living in Moss Side. And when I developed an episode of psychological distress, I was forced to interrupt medical school. I would just go to the masjid, this Somalian masjid. And we had this scholar. And I'll never forget what he said. He said, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam had a six-pack. You know, he had a six-pack. Yeah, be proud. Proud, be physically strong. I can't emphasize enough. A healthy body is a healthy mind. This is how you become more resilient. We should be, when I'm running in the morning, do you think I see Muslims running in the morning when I'm outdoors? There's not a single Muslim. Wherever in the world I go, and alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, I've given talks all over the world, I don't see a single Muslim running in the morning. And we should be the leaders. We should be the leaders in physical activities and in intellectual activities. We should be the leaders, and we're not. Okay, I spoke about the stigma in the Muslim community. There are taboo topics in the Muslim community. Illicit substances, for example, drugs, suicide. We don't talk about these things. Toxic masculinity. What is toxic masculinity? Did you know that the male to female suicide ratio is 3-1? The male to female suicide ratio is 3-1. There are more men killing themselves. There are more men incarcerated. There are more men on the streets. We can't express our emotions. We can't. If you express your emotion, even though Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam would cry, his beard would be drenched with tears. Our role model, our paragon. We must strive to emulate him. Just because you express your emotions, it doesn't make you any less of a man. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was the greatest man to grace this planet. He is our role model. But unfortunately, we have this toxic masculinity. You can't express your emotions. And I think that is contributing to the male to female suicide ratio of 3-1. Okay, now let's go back to Gaza, yeah? Firstly, there needs to be a political solution. It doesn't matter if you run 15 kilometers a day, every day. It doesn't matter if you develop mental health resilience. There needs to be a political solution. Because unless there's a political solution, the events will continue to adversely affect our mental health. Okay? We can buffer the traumatic effects of the conflict by exercising, by developing mental health resilience, but there has to be a political solution. I'm not interested in this pause. I'm not interested in this truce. I want a ceasefire. You've heard, anyone heard of George Galloway before? He was being interviewed, this British kind of politician. He said with conviction, no justice, no peace. Right? But also in the mind. Also in the mind. If there's no, and look, you see that there was 100,000 people in London, UK, protesting, peacefully protesting, because of the injustice. But also in the mind, there will be no peace. So not only in society or in the state, but in the mind, there will be no peace. And so if the perpetrator evades accountability, then there will be no peace in your mind. But in the dunya, they may evade accountability. But in the akhirah, we know they will never evade accountability. We will all be held accountable. It reminds me of, have you heard of this film called The Kingdom of Heaven? The Clash of the Cross and the Crescent? I thought it was a very powerful film. There was a scene. There was dialogue between the king of Jerusalem at the time. He had leprosy. And he said to, I think, his knight, the whole world is in chess. Any move can be the death of you. Do anything except for remain where you started, and you can't be sure of your end. None of us are sure of our end, or what hand will guide us there. A king may move a man, a father may claim a son. That man can also move himself, and only then does that man truly begin to play his own game. Remember, howsoever you are played, or by whom, your soul is in your keeping alone. Even though those who presume to play you be kings or men of power, when you stand before Allah, You cannot say, but I was told by others to do thus, or that virtue was not convenient at the time. This will not suffice. You will be held accountable. Everything you say and do. And I think that should help to provide us with some comfort. The knowledge that the perpetrator will not evade accountability in the hereafter. Okay, so a question that we are often posed: why is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not intervening? Why are we not witnessing divine intervention? But I think the question that we should be asking is, why are we reacting in this way? Are we asking that question? Not why is Allah not intervening, but why are we asking the question, why is Allah not intervening? Why? And there's a serenity. You may have heard of the serenity prayer before. You know what? God grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference between the two. What's your interpretation of this, brother? Yes, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. I think so, in my humble opinion, and Allah knows best. But my interpretation, and it defies a single interpretation, but my interpretation is, we have often no control over events, but we can control how we react to those events. So ask yourself, is my reaction the way that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ would react? Is it an Islamic reaction, or is it an emotional reaction? Ask yourself that. How would the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ react if there was some loss? Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. With gratitude. Now, I'm not an expert in Islamic sciences, but you remember in the Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah, if someone can recite it for me, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed to the angels that He was going to create Adam, how did the angels react? You remember? Can you translate for that for me, brother? To kill each other. Exactly. Not out of disobedience, because we know that the angels cannot be recalcitrant. They cannot be disobedient. But look what we're seeing. Look what's happening. The children of Adam are wreaking havoc. We are killing each other. Then what was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's response to that? You remember what His response was? I know better. And there was a professor, he's a revert, he was an atheist. And he's based in Kansas. I'll never forget his response. He said, in common parlance, in other words, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in other words, in common parlance, I know exactly what I'm doing. Now, this same professor in Kansas, the revert, he said there are 3 recurrent themes in the Quran. That there will be suffering. There will be suffering. In this dunya, there will be suffering. Number 2, that we have a choice. We can choose to commit sin, or we can choose to do good deeds. And the 3rd is that we have been endowed with intellect. Okay? What's the first word that was revealed in the Holy Quran? Iqra. Yeah? In other words, seek instruction. Seek instruction. Your reaction to the atrocities should not be influenced by your emotions. It should be influenced by the Quran and the Sunnah. And the Quran is clear and the Sunnah is clear. When some calamity, when we have some type of calamity in our lives, with forbearance and fortitude, and be patient and be grateful. There is a case study. This is on social media. You remember the Muslim father? He was in the hospital and he was telling everyone in Arabic, but Arabic, be stronger. And I think he was referring to our spiritual health. شدوا حيلكم. Be stronger. We're all being tested. And what happened was that I think 2 of his children died. One of them was a toddler, crushed. But look how look, this is an example of the power of reframing. And he was able to align his spiritual health with his mental health. Because did he appear distressed to you? Did he appear distraught to you? No. On the contrary, what did he say? I want to pray 2 rak'atain, gratitude, because my son is a martyr. Can you see? Look what happened. So when the angels responded to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Adam will wreak havoc and he will kill. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responded, I know better. Even in this genocide, even during the atrocities, his iman was so strong, his spiritual health was so strong that he still remembered Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that moment. This is, for me, my humble interpretation of the wisdom of the hikmah of creation. Even, do we know pain? Do you think we know pain? Are we really being tested? What about the wife of Fir'aun, Asiya? You remember how Fir'aun tortured her? If I'm not mistaken, she was suspended from the ceiling, hooks on her body. And she made a dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, show me my dwelling place, my eternal dwelling place in the hereafter. And if I'm not mistaken, Fir'aun was perplexed. Why is Asiya smiling? So this is an example of the power of reframing and aligning your spiritual health with your mental health. And it can be protective. Now don't get me wrong, we can experience emotional turmoil. That doesn't mean that you have weak iman. Now if I'm not mistaken, and somebody please rectify me if I am, when the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ discovered that his uncle Hamza radiallahu anhu, his body was mutilated. Remember, I think it was the wife of Abu Sufyan, she would chew on his, it was Hind, wasn't it? She chewed on his internal organs. It's not that authentic. Okay. Okay, so you're saying that it's not enough, it's a weak. Okay, so Jazakallah khair. Please let me know if the following hadith is authentic or not. I've come across it. Please let me know. We're all on a journey of discovery together. I understand that when the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ discovered what happened to his uncle, he was crying inconsolably. Nobody ever saw him this distraught before. Does that sound authentic to you? I think the point I'm making is, even when, for example, when he lost his beloved wife Khadija, when he lost his uncle, I think the year of sorrow, right? This was the year of sorrow. The point I'm making is that we can be melancholic, we can be sad, we can experience emotional turmoil, but that doesn't mean that you have weak iman. Because this is the accusation that's often made, right? If you are depressed, your iman is weak. No. And that's coming from a Muslim psychiatrist as well. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we have weak iman. But an iman can contribute to mental health recovery, and it can contribute to mental health resilience. Okay, I think I wanted to talk about, in psychology, have you heard of attachment theory? You know, during the developmental period, the child can develop attachments to the parents. And you can have healthy attachments, you know, or you can have the unhealthy attachments. And then that will influence relationships in the future. Sah? I think we have an unhealthy attachment to the dunya. We know that anxiety towards death is inversely related to religiosity. What does that mean? The stronger your iman, the less anxious you are about your death. There's data to support this. There's evidence to support this. And I think we have an unhealthy attachment to the dunya. And that might explain some of the emotional turmoil that many of us are experiencing. And again, I want to go back. It's one of my favorite films, The Kingdom of Heaven. I love how they portrayed Salah ad-Din. Oh, if only we had a Salah ad-Din. I think maybe this would help. And it wasn't the scene with Salah ad-Din, I think it was with one of the knights and one of the soldiers. And, you know, the Crusades, the clash of the cross and the crescent. And Salah ad-Din, he had a reputation. His army was mighty. And the soldier with the Crusaders was going to go into battle with the Muslim army. And so the knight says to the soldier, you ride with the army. The soldier said, my order is with the army. I have to ride, my order is with the army. And then the knight said to the soldier, but you ride into certain death. And the soldier said, but all death is certain. And as Muslims, no one should realize and appreciate this more. As Muslims, it's like we are almost deluded, in denial. And that's a defense mechanism. We will all die. All death is certain. But unfortunately, we have this unhealthy attachment. And that can render us vulnerable to developing emotional turmoil. So I want to reiterate, kind of trying to align your mental health with your emotional health and your physical health and your spiritual health. I think it's really important. So how many of us woke up this morning and prayed Fajr? Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. I think that's beneficial for our mental health. How many of us woke up this morning and went to the masjid and prayed Fajr? Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. May Allah accept your prayer, inshallah. The point I'm making is, the devil will try to deter you from going to the masjid. But we all know the masjid is not as full in Fajr as it is in Salatul Jum'ah. It cannot be overstated how praying Fajr in the masjid can energize you and inspire you. There is no better way to start your day than going to pray Fajr in the masjid. These are all things that we can do. I know there needs to be a political solution. I know there needs to be a ceasefire. But if you wake up in the morning and pray dua in a congregation for our brothers and sisters and the children in Palestine, that can contribute to mental health resilience in and of itself. Now, the spiritual health, your iman, can fluctuate. Like your physical health and your emotional health, right? And your mental health. It fluctuates. Sometimes you feel strong, sometimes you don't. But you need to condition yourself. You need to prime yourself and prepare yourself and discipline yourself. By praying your 5 daily prayers on time in the masjid, reading Quran, learning more about Islam and the prophets and the beautiful stories, you can fortify yourself. You can become more disciplined. And your iman and your spiritual health increases. And that can protect you against developing emotional problems and mental health problems. So, because many of us, we're not tested. Up until recently, we weren't really tested, were we? We're creatures of comfort. We live lives of luxury. We have roofs over our head. We have 24-hour electricity. We have food, and we take all of these things for granted. We're not really being tested. So when the test comes, we're not ready. But by priming yourself and conditioning yourself and disciplining yourself, your emotional health, your physical health, extricating yourself from the comfort zone. And honestly, this morning I went to prayed my Fajr and I saw a non-Muslim running in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning. This person woke up, extricated herself from her comfort zone. And now when there is adversity, it could be physical adversity, she's ready for the test. Are we ready for the spirit? Now we're being tested spiritually. Did we condition ourselves? Did we wake up in the morning, every morning come to the pray Fajr in the mosque? Did we read the Quran? Did we learn more about the stories of the prophets? We didn't. And that can render us vulnerable to developing emotional mental health problems, in my humble opinion. So again, the spiritual health can fluctuate, and we need to discipline ourselves and condition. It's like going to the gym. Do you have any gym bros here? You want to go bench like 100 kg and you've never benched in your life? They will all laugh at you. They think this is ridiculous. You have to have the discipline. It takes time. But once you get above that kind of threshold, you get into the habit, right? It's having these habits. Okay, exercise. I can't emphasize enough the importance of exercise. I mean, that definitely contributes. I don't take any medication for my mental health. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. And that, I mean, it's for me, it's non-negotiable. I have to exercise. And how do you get motivated? It's not easy. It's cold outside, right? And I don't really want to go for a run, but it's like removing that. It's not like an option. Like not exercising is that's not an option. You just have to do it. And plus as well, because for the younger people, you want to be a role model. I want to practice what I preach. You want to be. And I remember I went to, in the UK, we have, each university has an Islamic society, an ISOC. And I told the brothers, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, exercise. And then we went for a run together. And he's younger than me, so he thinks like he's going to outrun me. But no, I'm confident. And he's like, 15 years younger than me. I remember he only does 10 kilometers. I pushed him to 20. Afterwards, he hugged me. He's crying. So remind yourself, we have to set the example. And that can inspire you. We have to set the example for our younger people. There's something called post-traumatic growth. And it's true, what doesn't kill you does make you stronger. Remember that. So all of us are experiencing trauma at the moment, but there's that post-traumatic growth. There's a scientific study entitled Counting Our Blessings instead of Our Burdens. I don't know if you've ever heard of it before. Developing what we call like dispositional gratitude. So when you populate a gratitude diary, like you wake up in the morning, and this is actually a scientific study. You can Google it. You'll find the paper. And people who populated the gratitude diary had better health outcomes than those who didn't. I mean, there are countless things that we can be grateful for. I used to work as a doctor in emergency medicine. And there was a patient who had a lung carcinoma, lung cancer. They had one of their lungs resected. The man couldn't breathe. All of us are breathing easily. We can all inhale, we can all exhale, and we don't think twice about it. This man couldn't breathe. He had difficulty in breathing. This is one thing. And what does the Quran say about the children of Adam? We're ungrateful. We are. We're ungrateful. So you actually have to write it down every day. The things that you are populate a gratitude diary. And there's evidence to prove that it can contribute to mental health resilience. There are so many things. Remember that Muslim brother in Gaza? He returned, I think, to his home and it was reduced. It was obliterated. You know which one I'm talking about. And they interviewed him and he was just smiling. The non-Muslims, they don't know. The non-Muslims are confused. And they ask him, how are you feeling? Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Allah gives, Allah takes. I'm still alive. Alhamdulillah. He's grateful. So this is what we call like a case study, if you like. If you're interested in research. Oh no, it's a small sample size, n equals to 1. But it illustrates an important point. By having this dispositional gratitude, by being grateful, that can contribute to mental health resilience. And there's so much that we should be grateful for. I don't know if you've heard of a book called Lost Connections. Apparently it's like a international bestseller or something, or from somebody called Johann Hari. Unfortunately, who knows, maybe Allah will open his heart and open his mind, I don't know. He doesn't talk about he talks about lost connections with other people in your community, for example. And the social connectedness, the importance of that cannot be overstated. When I'm working in emergency psychiatry at 2 o'clock in the morning and I get a phone call and the nurses are saying to me, there's a patient here who is suicidal. This is no exaggeration. Almost every single patient in a mental health crisis is isolated and disconnected. I used to work in New Zealand. I prayed in the masjid where the Christchurch mosque terror attack took place. I prayed in that masjid. The brothers that I prayed with were killed. And I remember Can somebody verify the authenticity of this hadith? On the day of judgment, the fire, the heat will not touch you if you are approachable. If you're easy, if you make it easy for other people to approach you, you won't feel the heat. What's your interpretation of that? What's your interpretation? The importance of social connectedness. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the marketplace, always smiling. Always smiling. He's so approachable. And that's what protects us from developing mental health problems, the social connectedness. Now in this book, which is, I'd recommend it, but alhamdulillah, I'm publishing a book as well. It will be released after the new year. So that's from an Islamic perspective. So I don't know, some shameless self-promotion. May Allah forgive me. But this lost connections, they don't talk about no connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And why do you think so many people are depressed and anxious in the global north? In this secular world we're living in. So the social connectedness. And the person who says salam first, correct me if I'm mistaken, it's fard. Somebody says salam to you, you have to say alaykum as-salam. You respond with at least the equivalent, sah? And if you don't, if it's fard, it's haram if you don't. The importance of that social connectedness. But correct me, please rectify me if I'm mistaken, I'm not an expert in Islamic sciences. But the person who says salam first is the more humble person. And Allah loves humility. Why? Because arrogance is what banished Iblis from Jannah. So the opposite, Allah loves the opposite, humility. And your eternal dwelling place in the hereafter will be closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's throne, closer to His arsh in Jannatul Firdaus, inshallah. Just by saying salam first. So I can't emphasize enough the social connectedness. The importance of that cannot be overstated. These are all ways that we can develop mental health resilience. Through this community cohesion, we can collectively cope with the trauma. It's heartbreaking. No, a lot of this is preventable. We say that in mental health, prevention is better than cure. Prevention is better than intervention. But there's just so much stigma. Do you know Anthony Joshua? You know Anthony Joshua? Let me tell you a story. We call him AJ. He's from a place called Watford. Now he lives in Finchley, in London, North London. Well, he would live in Finchley because that's where all the Jewish people live. And it's a rich area. So, he moved from a poor area, he made his millions and he moved to the rich area. I was nominated, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, for what you call Mental Health Hero Award. And you know how the kafirin, they get excited, yeah? It's a star-studded event, all the celebrities were there. Rishi Sunak was there, the Prime Minister. King Charles, he was there. Alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, I got the award. And I spoke about this toxic mask. Do you remember when I think it was his second fight against Usyk in Saudi, right? And he still wasn't able to defeat him. You remember how emotional he was? He was crying. And then segments of the media would ridicule him. Not Usyk. Usyk was actually very empathetic and understanding. But the media, they lambasted him. And they attacked him. And then in my acceptance speech, I spoke about how we need to rewrite the narrative and what it means to be a strong man. And expressing our emotions and seeking help are signs of strength, not signs of weakness. And this is when AJ made eye contact with me. And I couldn't help it. In front of everyone, I said, I love you, AJ. And he's like, I love you, Dr. Hankir. Romance. And I returned to my table. And I don't know what was happening. Somebody grabbed my arm. And they took me to AJ's table. You know the Spice Girls? Yes, Scary Spice. I was really impressed. She was sat next to AJ, Mel B. She was so dignified. She said, Dr. Hankir, please sit next to AJ. I want you to speak with him. Is this now an opportunity for da'wah? Maybe. So we're talking me in the heavyweight champion of the world. This guy's got guns like you wouldn't believe it, man. This guy's like very strong man. And I said something to him, because I prayed my Maghrib. Like, where'd you get, he kept on saying books. He's like, Dr. Hankir, how many books have you read? Book, he kept on, that's the same thing, he wouldn't stop saying that, books. And I said to him, I prayed my Maghrib in this venue. And he looked at me, the heavyweight champion of the world, and he said to me, you humble me. The beauty of Islam, how it enters the hearts. We say the ear is a conduit to the heart. And how it humbles people. Number one. Number two, by stating unapologetically that we need to rewrite the narrative on what it means to be a strong man, we can connect with others. By expressing our emotions doesn't make you any less of a man. As I said before, I'll say it again, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, his beard was drenched with tears. Even Salah ad-Din, he had a reputation, didn't he? The tears of Salah ad-Din and his chivalry. Umar ibn al-Khattab, he was a warrior, but still he would shed his tears as well. This is I don't think there's any other way of life that can reconcile the emotional aspect with the masculinity that is, this kind of the traditional definition of masculinity that we have to provide and protect. It's a thing of beauty. It's a thing to marvel. So exercise, social connectedness, praying your fajr in the masjid, which will energize and inspire you. Seeking help is a sign of strength, not a sign of weakness. It's important to see a mental health care professional if you notice any dysfunction, distress. You might become more irritable. You might become more argumentative. We need to have a holistic approach. Unfortunately, in the global north, we operate from a secular framework that excludes religiosity and spirituality. But we're trying to change things. I didn't want this to be prescriptive. There's no, I made some notes here, but there was no real script. As I said, I think many of us are more traumatized than we realize we are. And it's actually the people who aren't here that I think I'm more concerned about, because they might be in denial, for example. Because what happens with public stigma is that we internalize it, and we develop something called self-stigma. And again, like I said, the toxic masculinity. These are taboo topics. We just don't talk. You know what the most effective way of reducing stigma is? When you meet someone living with a mental health condition. When you make contact. That's not my opinion. That's the evidence. There's a very prestigious medical journal called The Lancet. And there was the Lancet Commission in 2022 on ending the stigma and discrimination in mental health. And this was the point they kept on emphasizing when you meet someone living with a mental health condition. Because we have these preconceptions that they are weak, that they are unreliable, that they are irresponsible. But that's not true. People living with mental health conditions are law-abiding, peace-loving, community-serving individuals. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, after I developed this episode of psychological distress, I recovered. Last year, you've seen him. He's making comments about Gaza all the time. You know the Director General of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros? You might I think if you saw his picture, you'd recognize him instantly. He contacted me. Out of all the people in the world, he said, you, Dr. Hankir, are the Director General, the winner of the Director General Award for Global Health. There I was in Geneva, in front of all the world leaders, waiting for Emmanuel Macron to finish giving his talk. And there was only one person who was inspired in a standing ovation, and it wasn't Emmanuel Macron. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. I was able to inspire a standing ovation. The point is that you can recover and you can be the best at what you do. See, there is this myth that we need to debunk, that you will never amount to anything in life. That's not true. You can be the best at what you do. It can make you more insightful. It can make you more empathetic. It can make you more driven. It's nothing to be ashamed about. So, as I said, I like this analogy. Muhammad Salah, due to the demands of his occupation, is vulnerable to developing an injury, a physical injury, an injury to his body. And there's no hesitation for him to go to see a physiotherapist. There's no hesitation to announce that in the media. But, due to the nature of our occupation, we can also have psychological injury. And yet still we are reluctant to go seek therapy. And that needs to change. There needs to be, I know I'm repeating myself, but repetition is emphasis. There needs to be a political solution. There needs to be an immediate ceasefire. But there are things that we can do to increase our resilience. So I hope that's helped. If you have any questions, by all means answer them. It's important to be, if you do have a presence in social media, that can be a game changer. My best friend Wasim said I was dancing in the dark for so long. But if you create content, because a lot of this content, because of the algorithms as well, the hadith, for example, on TikTok, and now alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, almost, I don't know if you've heard of Akhi Ayman before. Yeah, he's from southeast London, a place called Catford, which is where I used to work. But that's very powerful because a lot of Muslims can relate to him, right? Yeah, because, a lot of us we're struggling, right? No, we're not born with a silver, we're not born with a silver spoon in our mouth. We know that, unfortunately, poverty and unemployment is overrepresented in our communities. And these are both social determinants of reduced life expectancy, criminal behavior, chemical coping. You don't know if you know chemical coping. Again, like I said, these are taboo topics in the Muslim community. Chemical coping, taking illicit substances and drugs. And his story is very powerful because he's honest and open. He said, what did he say, a waste man? Is that the word that he's a waste man? And then, because he deviated from Sirat al-Mustaqim. But then he used Islam, and then that contributed to improvements in his spiritual health, mental health, and physical health. But we didn't know about him. I didn't know about him up until I think started consuming content. And you should create content as well. So that would be helpful. And that definitely contributes to my mental health resilience, learning more about the stories of the Tabi'een and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and the companions. But be careful, because social media can also be harmful to your mental health, and you can become addicted as well. And the company that you keep, the content that you consume, challenging the stigma, it's nothing to be ashamed about. Inshallah. Yeah, and a reminder not to be too attached to this dunya. I think, we need to constantly remind ourselves, because it's easy to forget, isn't it? And we don't know. Every breath we take is a rahmah from Allah, it's a mercy from Allah. Look what's happening now to our brothers and sisters and the children in Gaza. So every breath we take is an opportunity to repent and remind yourself, because what happens is you can develop excessive guilt because of the khutrat al-shaytan. You're not even aware that you have deviated from Sirat al-Mustaqim. And then one day, you behold your reflection in the mirror and you become unrecognizable even to yourself. And the realization of what you have become can be so overwhelming that you can have a mental health crisis. And then you start to punish yourself. How could I have deviated from Sirat al-Mustaqim? And try to internalize this message mentally, intellectually, and emotionally in the heart, the mind and the heart. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most merciful. You go to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with a mountain of sins, He'll come to you with a mountain of forgiveness, providing, of course, that you don't ascribe any partners to Him. So I think that's really important, because the excessive guilt can immobilize you, and you can chastise yourself, and you can punish yourself. Don't do that. Just remember, keep on saying to yourself, Allah, and your sins will be converted into good deeds, inshallah. So protect your minds, protect your hearts, stay socially connected, seek help, stay in contact. I'll come to the masjid. If you want to talk, don't hesitate, approach me. We're all brothers. We're all fellow passengers to the grave. We can all learn from each other, inshallah. I think we are more traumatized than we are aware. Go back to the topographical model of the mind, the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. And all of this trauma is so distressing, we're submerging it in the unconscious mind, but it's manifesting in our arguments with our wives. colleagues at the workplace, you're becoming more irritable and argumentative. And that is a manifestation of the unresolved trauma. There is so much unresolved trauma. So by all means, seek informal support, but come to me for the professional help. And I'll try to, I'll do as much as I can. And as I said, we're in the process of bringing this friendship bench to the masjid. So it's a type of therapy delivered by non-specialists. And there's evidence to prove that it is effective at treating certain mental health conditions. If you have any questions, please ask them. Don't be shy. You know, we're all here to learn. Yes, brother. Yes, that's correct, yes. Okay. So in Western, at the University of Western Ontario, I'm an assistant professor. In Florida, I'm a full professor, and in the UK, I'm a full professor. So I'm a professor of psychiatry here. And I'm a consultant psychiatrist physician at Victoria Hospital. So I have 1.5 days per week on research, well, 1 day per week. I do a lot of public engagement. So I lectured in every medical school in the UK. I've lectured all over the world. And my talks are about challenging Islamophobia. So it's because we know that there's that Islamophobia has adverse effects on Muslim mental health. So by challenging Islamophobia, we can try to improve mental health outcomes. Yes. ترجم يا حبيبي. The news. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think this is why I think sometimes disabling your notifications, even if only temporarily, can be beneficial for your mental health. Definitely, because because we're addicted. How many times do we look at our smartphones? You know, all these screens. So to reiterate, disabling your notifications, even if only temporarily, can be beneficial for your mental health, 100%. I mean, because there's so much sorrow, isn't there? It's depressing what's happening. But I think we need to know about it. It's incumbent upon us to know about it. We have to at least know about it. Please contribute to my fundraiser. I'm raising funds for medical aid for Palestine. As you know, the healthcare system has been decimated in the besieged enclave. So please contribute to my fundraiser. So far we've made, I think, £1,500, which is about 2,000 Canadian. But all contributions go to Medical Aid for Palestine, which is one of the few international organizations that are still in Gaza. Yes, Akhi. Yeah. About the conflict. Yeah, that's difficult. So I'm not a child and adolescent psychiatrist, so it's not really my area of expertise. You know, I can by all means share my humble opinion with you. I think, you know, they are, I guess by definition, innocent, although I'm sure a lot of parents would disagree with me. You know, you little rascal. No, but I mean, yeah, they are kind of, you know, emotionally damaged, right? I think you need to make yourself emotionally available as a parent. And yeah, show them affection, show them love. We know that drawing can provide us with an insight into their minds. But so my advice would be, yeah, to try to, they don't need to know. I would definitely impose limits on their devices, because those notifications, they don't need to know them. They're very emotional at that age, and especially with their development as well. So those are some of the things that I would do. Limit their kind of social media consumption. Make yourself emotionally available to them. Yeah, and get them to express themselves, through the power of art. And if you have any concerns, see your family doctor, and they can refer to a child and adolescent psychiatrist. So that would be my initial thoughts. And have that kind of, yeah. Unfortunately, in this modern age, the family has become fragmented, hasn't it? And that family unit is just so important, because that can protect a child from, what they say, right? It takes a village to raise a child. Right? So yeah, bring them to the masjid if you can. So those, I think, would be my initial comments. It's important to know that you can recover, by the way. That's really important. I want to plant the seeds of hope into the hearts, minds, bodies, and souls, because we might know someone who is suffering. Don't get me wrong, I don't want to misinform you. Not everyone recovers. And we're not doing enough for people who have severe mental illness like schizophrenia or bipolar affective disorder or schizoaffective disorder. But definitely a majority of people, recovery is for the many, not for the few. And it's important, I think, that you plant the seeds of hope, because they often succumb to despair. But we need to have a holistic approach that integrates faith, Islam, with mainstream mental health care services and physical health care services as well. Any other comments, questions? I think that's it. It's 9:30. I think that's been about an hour. I hope you found that helpful. And like I said, I'll come to the mosque, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. So don't hesitate to approach me or contact me. I'm very active on X, and I'm on LinkedIn, and just approach me in the masjid as well, inshallah. Yes, akhi. No, my first name is Ahmed. Yeah, Ahmed Hankir, yeah. Just Google me. Yeah, just Google me, you'll find me on Google. Yeah, and if you want me to give a talk to your peers at Western, I'm a prof there, so yeah, that's fine. I don't know if I have any talks coming up in Western. Oh yeah, I do. I think I do. Abdurrahman, Abdurrahman. He's been in touch with me. Yeah, the president. Yeah. Yeah. I think because Islamophobia because my talk on Islamophobia has been integrated into the medical school curriculum of Cambridge University and at King's College London as well. So we're seeing if we can get it integrated here at Western. Or the week after or something. No, next week I'm in Doha anyway. I'm in Qatar, so I can't. Yeah, I'm in Qatar next week, inshallah. Remember me? Yeah, I know. I love Doha. Yeah, that was fun. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Yeah, good Muslim vibe over there. I think we're done now, yeah? Jazakumullah khair. Thank you so much. Protect your minds and protect your hearts. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.